Welcome to the MMA Fan Podcast. Ladies and gentlemen, I give you Stu and Blake.
Hello,
Hi, John. How's it going? Oh, we can't. See, you can tell we're professional.
We can't do that.
Look, we're with a professional commentator, presenter, and everything. And we come in like the novices we are, speaking over each other.
Came in hot.
Perfect.
You're clearly so excited to speak to me, but I mean, I take it as a massive compliment.
Well, it's true. We are excited to speak to you. Massively excited. John, I think first things first, I really want to just get out there the Keeping the Lights on fundraiser that you're doing. I want you to tell us all about that and where that came from and how people can get involved in it.
Oh, lovely. Well, first of all, thank you very much for giving me the stage to do that. So yeah, it's a UK MMA fundraiser. The gyms generally are probably the worst hit in this pandemic. And then when you get through to like martial arts and mixed martial arts, which is obviously my world, where you're breathing in very close quarters to one another, sweating into each other's mouths, etc. It's not an ideal environment for COVID. So I understand the restrictions that have been put upon us all. But as a result of that, and the result of where the sport is at with regards how the government supports mixed martial arts, which it really doesn't, there's just not the kind of infrastructure and the funding around it to help one another out. So we have to sort of look to the community to do that, I feel. And with my travels and my own experiences with my own sort of home team, if you like, I know that coaches are struggling because people can't pay their subscriptions, etc. And these are like churches for people. The mat space is a place where, you know, people like me who have no sort of professional aspirations, that's where we get our physical and mental stuff in check. So without that, people suffer. So it's important to me that the industry still manages to thrive coming out of this. So I thought, what can I do? I'm sadly not a multi-millionaire yet. That may still happen. But yeah, what I have is a contacts list. So I've been hitting up a bunch of people within the space to see if they can spread the good word, donate some stuff that I can auction off. And that's basically what's happening. So the three main things are, I need to know the gyms that need a bit of help, because that's who I'm doing it for. But I am struggling to find that out. I understand it's sort of an uncomfortable process to put your arm in the air and say, yeah, you know, business isn't booming and it'd be great to be part of this. So that's one thing. Then anyone that's got anything that's of any value to auction off on eBay, which I'll be doing through May, that'd be great. And then all of the funds raised will go into a big pot and the public will vote on who gets that money. So there'll be a little kind of short list of gyms and maybe a little bump to say why they feel like they could do with a bit of a cash injection. And then in June 1st, it all ends and the money goes through to 1, 2, 3 gyms, depending on how much we raise.
Oh, that's fantastic, man. What a great cause. And so these gyms, you want them to try and get in touch with you.
I do.
Yeah. And then hopefully they'll be in the pot to win the pot, as it were.
That's exactly right. So I can't nominate gyms.
Yes.
I need to know, you know, my reach is okay, but I need to know on the ground, people on the ground to tell me who, you know, they can just nominate their gym. You know, I'm in talks with a very exciting manufacturer of stuff, I shall say. I hope it comes through, because they've said that they're going to donate a lot to this cause, which means I might not, it won't be like a cash donation, but people might be able to get some stuff, and they want to help a number of gyms as well. So I'm trying to find it. This is evolving, and the more people that come forward, I can probably help out in different ways as well. So it's called keepingthelightson.net. And all the details are in there. I've tried to make it pretty straightforward. And yeah, I'm excited to be able to do something positive.
That's fantastic, man. Well done. And so you've mentioned that you yourself go to a gym. How did you start off your kind of like passion for martial arts? Like, how long have you been training for, and how did you get into martial arts?
I've been training since I was 7. I think my first martial art was judo. So I did that as a kid whilst like friends were going to football camps. So I'd be at judo camp. So I competed nationally. in judo for a little while, so I enjoyed that. But then Karate Kid and a few other things like that took a hold of me, and I ended up going over to karate. My uncle took me. I went with him. I'm very close to my uncle. He still actually practices. I think it's like a 4th dan in Shotokan karate, and he's a hater on mixed martial arts as well. So we have some.
Oh, really?
Yeah. We have some spirited conversations. He thinks it's just fat, sweaty blokes with no technique, and I'm like,
have you showed him like Wonder Boy and Machida and all these karate style guys?
I've showed him everything. He thinks it's fake. I'm like, come on. Really? Like that some of these guys in traditional martial arts are just, they're so narrow-minded. It's kind of funny, really. But whatever, right? Like if he's not into it, he's not into it. It's not for everyone. So anyway, I did it with him through my early teenage years, and again did some competitive stuff, but nothing serious. But as I sort of mentioned, none of my friends really did this. So it was always a kind of solo effort, which is fine. But I guess I kind of wanted to be with all the other guys, part of the cool kids. And I mean, I've never got there. Still trying.
Neither have I, mate. Neither have I.
I've just accepted it now. It's way easier. So I would then go backwards and forwards into football, which is obviously, our national sport. And I played football loads, rugby at school and stuff. So I've always been really active. But then boxing was a massive part of my household. My dad was a big boxing fan, like Barry McGuigan. And then as I grew up, it was like the Chris Eubank era, Frank Bruno, Lennox Lewis. So I watched a lot of boxing, and I ended up getting into boxing. Our neighbour actually fought for the UK or Great Britain, whatever the iteration was back, because he was a lot older. And I remember sparring him in his lounge, and he was a heavyweight, and he was a lot older. Bless him. He just let me hit him, but I got the taste for it there, and ended up doing some novice ABA stuff whilst I was at uni. And I really enjoyed it. And I enjoyed the fact that you'd get a bit of recognition on the streets as well. People would maybe not, they'd think twice about messing with you. And you just had a little reputation that came with fighting, which as someone that got bullied when they were younger, it really did change things. That's a pretty decent thing to tell the chicks as well. So
just on that, John, can I just ask you about the transition from judo to karate to then boxing? Did you find them transitions more, I guess, from karate to boxing? Did you find them quite an easy thing to do, insofar as the footwork and how they're so different? I mean, from someone that's sort of dabbled with Muay Thai and then boxed as well, I can't get my feet. I just keep going back to a sort of Thai stance, right. And so, did you find that transition, like through the different sort of arts, like quite simple?
Well, actually, I'll talk about, you're right, and I've experienced that later on, funnily enough, trying to merge the boxing and Muay Thai, going from boxing to mixed martial arts, which is slightly separate. But for what you're talking about, not really. I think I was so young, and I was maybe doing it for different reasons as well. Judo, there was no face punching, and then you move on to karate, where you can now strike. But then boxing, but you're not knocking people out in kumite. Well, some people do, but it wasn't like Kokushinkai, sure, where it's really strong stuff. So it's just touch. But boxing's different, right? You're getting bloodied up and gym wars and everything else. It felt a lot more real. You're in a real fight. And I was going after that, I think. Everything else just seemed to be a little bit diluted, and I didn't see mixed martial arts at that time. I didn't see where it could lead to, and that street cred, I think, was something that I was looking for in my earlier years as well. So, as I say, when you've been on the receiving end of physical and mental bullying for a little while, then going to karate never really didn't sort of work for me. So boxing kind of did. But in terms of the technical nature, I think maybe I knew how to punch, but boxing's different again. You have a very upright stance. Karate's very loose and your hands are much lower down. But I took to boxing pretty well. You see boxing on TV, you don't necessarily see competitive karate on TV, so you'd probably have to be taught that. Whereas boxing looks like it's a bit more natural. Even someone in the street will try and bring their hands up, albeit probably drop them when they're looking to throw them, but they know the stance. So that wasn't so much of a challenge. but going into Muay Thai to turn my hip in from where it was, my leg got destroyed. For a long time. But I think the Muay Thai gyms, because we were amateur, like they saw the value in having me spar some of their boys because I had decent hands, but they just chop my leg away and I'd be on my ass regularly. So it took me a long time to square my stance up. But then I would go and get some boxing training for mixed martial arts, and they would try and change me. I'm like, please don't try and change me. It's taken me so long to do this.
Yeah.
And then you evolve into MMA, where it's different again, where you have to maybe drop your stance a little bit depending on what you're facing. But that's the beauty of what we do is that challenge. And the more technical you make something, for me, the more I engage with it, because I know that it's just not easy to come by and you've really got to work at it.
You spoke a little bit about bullying and stuff. I wanted to know, where were you someone that struggled with confrontation at an early age and that led you to combat sports, or were you someone that was okay with confrontation and it was like a natural thing for you to go into combat sports? What kind of led to the other, if that makes sense?
I think I was just trying to find my way as a kid, and I don't think I probably handled certain situations very well. I think I was quite boastful. I remember very much, like, because of our background and where we had come from, like my dad was a tradesman, but we moved into an area where it was very middle class and people looked down on you a lot. So there was a lot of competition. And I sort of, my mum, I think, gave that to me because she came from very humble beginnings. So you sort of you're very defensive all the time. And then it comes across wrong. So there's that balance between being boastful and arrogant, and you end up taking a licking for it, and that's kind of what would come about. But yeah, I didn't want to get into confrontations with people, still don't, so no, it wasn't something that came natural to me. But I've ever since been a bit of a hothead. A temper is always there, and I continue to go to martial arts practice because it helps keep my ego in check, but it also helps with my self-confidence as well.
Absolutely. So how did you sort of transition from being the guy in the ring to then being the guy outside the ring?
Yeah, well, it was a long process. So as I say, I was doing boxing when I was at uni, and after university, like I did a graduate scheme in the city where I was in recruitment consultancy. So I wanted to work with the banks, but I was in the financial markets, if you like. So while I was doing that, none of this stuff was really something that I was looking to continue to do. I kept popping back every now and then, but it was football and business, like career. Very, very, I've always been super ambitious, wanted to achieve certain heights. But whilst I was in the city, I then got quite confident with communication, and I wanted to be a TV presenter. So I actually kicked that city career into touch and went to work for free. Funny enough, my first gig was on the Kilroy show, if you guys remember that.
I do.
So yeah, I worked there for a little bit, and it was good. It was fun. And then I went to Watchdog, and again, like working for like 14 grand a year after earning like 35 grand a year in the city, which was good, for a guy in his early 20s, quite a few years ago now. But I was always wrestling with that. My God, I like to earn money and set myself up and have nice things, if you like. But I also want this little dream of mine right now, and it wasn't happening fast enough for me. I'm super impatient, and to be honest, I wasn't good enough back then either. So with that, I'd sort of kicked that dream into touch. But funny enough, it's obviously come back around. And when I started really getting involved in mixed martial arts, which was in my late 20s, it was a sport that needed help in all which ways. And the way that it was being presented or represented in front of a camera behind a microphone, I just didn't see it that it was the most appropriate way or the best way to be embraced by a more mainstream audience. So when my coach put on his own show, typically I would be like cornering or like holding pads in the back. Someone did a terrible job for like a digital network before, and they kind of made a bit of a mockery out of the show and the sport. So I said, let me do that. He said, well, I can't, I don't have any hold over that, but why not do some commentary? And I just said yes. and it was just me with a little dictaphone by myself with a microphone, headphones on, and like a 35 fight card for amateurs or something at the Watford Coliseum. Within 5 years turned into a call from the UFC. Was it 5-6 years, something like that? But a few steps in between. But essentially, that's how it came about.
So you're at like you say like your coach's organization. I'm assuming a very small, probably online. You could maybe see it online or something like that. No, you couldn't even see it online. It was just for the fans that were there. You were commentating for.
Yeah. And then we would record it like a couple of camcorders over the cage, and then we would just merge my words. God forbid, like I hate to think what it sounds like now. We put those together, and then he would give those like DVDs to the fighters, or maybe sell them to their family and friends. It was just, I guess, at the time, it was just something additional that he could offer. And as a coach, he knows that it's important to assess your own work. So if you're filming your sparring sessions or your fight, you can go back and take a look and see what you did right or wrong. But it also makes it more entertaining, hopefully, if you have a little color to it with some words.
Yeah.
So that was really the idea. But like with anything that I've ever done, I do tend to sort of go in feet first. So I really kind of took it by the scruff of the neck and thought, right, well, if we're going to do this, I'd have a look at a fight card, see 3 or 4 fighters from the same gym. I'd drive down to that gym. I'd take my kit. I'd train with those guys that were going to be fighting, because we're talking amateur level here. So it's not like a UFC fighter at this stage. So I would be of a similar kind of level, if you like. So I'd jump in on a session, but then you really do have this wonderful like brotherhood with martial arts, where after it's done and you've punched each other in the face, you can sit down, you talk about what's just gone on, and then you end up, because the chemicals are flowing in the body, you just talk. And I was there to try and get the stories out of these guys as well. So I'm learning quite intimate detail about these fighters that I would then be talking about in a few weeks' time. And that was just so valuable. But what I didn't realize, and it wasn't by design necessarily, no one else was really doing that process who was doing commentary at the time. And I was starting to get noticed by obviously the effort that I was willing to go to for, as you say, like a show which wasn't even being broadcast anywhere. And I had a full-time job. At this point, I was an electrician running the family business with my dad. So 7 days a week, it was full on. So this was really a big passion of mine, and I very much enjoyed it. But I think that set me apart from some of the others that were trying to do similar things.
And so within that 5 years, where else did you go before it gets to the UFC? Like, was there a kind of an evolution of like, oh, I'm going here, now I'm going to that bigger organization and that bigger organization?
There weren't that many. Like, bit like the talent pool for commentators was very shallow, which is how I've been able to kind of rise up, because the competition is just not around. So I was very lucky going down to a gym in Islington, actually, the MMA clinic, which is owned by Graham Boylan. Graham Boylan also is the guy that runs Cage Warriors. At the time, he didn't. At the time, he was just putting on a show for his own club, and he asked me if I was a freelancer and I'd be willing to help him out. And I was like, of course, yeah. Wow, this is like a second gig, not just my coach's show. And then, like, I'll always be indebted to Graham, because when he was given the task of managing Cage Warriors, which at the time was probably the strongest brand in UK MMA, if not the second to Cage Rage, which Anderson Silva fought on, and a lot of big stars. So he inherited this wonderful organization, and he brought me along. That he could have chosen anyone who had a voice in UK mixed martial arts at the time. They would have taken that job in a heartbeat. But he stuck with me, and I'm so grateful for that. So it gave me reps on, yes, now something that was broadcast, that was streamed, and there were some television deals that were coming in here and there. I think we were on Sky Sports eventually. So that was wonderful stuff. And I got to also travel, which is important as well. So I'm doing 4 days in Dubai, calling fights for Cage Warriors. We went to Chechnya, Beirut. We went some crazy places, Ukraine, into Europe. Jordan, I went to Jordan like many times, 5 times maybe. So traveling, preparing, understanding that process, it was all a really, really good setup for the UFC, albeit like there was never any real preparation for what I was about to experience in terms of the production when we went over to the UFC. But it was pretty much as big as it could have gotten because there's just not that many layers and levels in between.
So when did the call come from the UFC, and you know, tell us about that day?
It was a wonderful day. I was. It was. No, seriously, it changed my life. I get quite emotional even thinking about it now. I'll start with the actual call because it's kind of a funny story. So imagine me, little John Gooden, the electrician, in his like combat trousers, his BJ Gooden electrical polo shirt on, and I'm round at Mrs. Patel's conservatory where I'm there assessing some water damage on behalf of Anglian Windows, who we were doing the work for, seeing if it was affecting the electrics. And I had done a screen test recently to see whether I was, going to get the job. The phone rings, Mrs. Patel's there trying to like tell me about what's gone on, and I literally gave her the hand. I'm not normally like that. I normally have, I'm well mannered, but this call was so important. I took this call and it was a woman called Amanda who was with the UFC. Cut a long story short, she says, "You're our guy. We want you to call fights for the UFC." So this is, and they all knew how much it meant to me because it was over a few months that this was happening. So I did what I had to do in Mrs. Patel's conservatory, and I got in the van. And I just remember like beating the steering wheel, laughing and crying, just going, I've done it. I can't believe I've done it. And I was in the running with, it's probably unfair for me to say his name, but there was a really well-known breakfast radio DJ at the time who had a huge following and audience. Like at that time, he had that breakfast show, and I beat him to the job. And I just couldn't believe that had happened. So yeah, I knew from that point that my life was about to change, and I was getting really despondent with the work as an electrician. I was fighting with my dad a lot. I just wanted a bit more for myself. Yeah, it's a tough gig being a tradesman, and because of all the other stuff I've done, and yeah, it just wasn't for me anymore. But I was, into my 30s at this point, so there's, you can't keep chopping and changing. I had a mortgage, a wife, aspirations to have a family, so this was it. And it genuinely has changed my life beyond recognition.
I'm amazed you finished the job at Mrs. Patel's house. I thought you would have just gone like, "Laters, I don't care."
Well, that's the thing. It's the family name though, and I actually still help my dad in different ways. I don't so much get the tools out anymore, but I was the technical guy, and there's a lot of testing and stuff. This is the boring side of our conversation, but my dad's all in on his business. He's such a workhorse. Despite his years, I don't think he'll ever retire. But I'm always there to support him, and I understand what he's going through. So I'm still kind of involved in the family business, maybe as some sort of counselor, if you like.
Yeah. Do you ever wind him up by maybe like commentating on how he's repairing a fuse box or anything?
I think I'd get the hairy side if I did that, because he's the sort of guy that wouldn't take too kindly to that. No, I have to say, like, my dad's never really been into MMA, and he's so into his work. He really is. He's very single-minded with that. But he said one thing to me that he's a bit of an old school guy. So this really did kind of melt me. And he said, "I'm very proud of you, son, because you did this all by yourself." And I think he's a bit of an oak tree for the family. And like him giving me a job in the family business, people can look and say, "I got a leg up." It was easy. I didn't even have to go through an interview process. So a lot of people get gifted some things, but I'd never really considered that. But I'd been given opportunities, but really I had created my own path, and I forget that sometimes, and I should sort of pat myself on the back because it has been a bit of a journey. I have had to get punched in the face along the way to get there as well. But I think it's an important lesson to learn, and some advice I give to others, that it makes you feel even better when you've been able to do it. There's nothing wrong with being gifted something and being given the leg up or whatever, but when you've achieved something by yourself and like created your own path, it does become a little bit more special.
And so when you got the call, obviously electricians, that goes out the window. It's UFC. That's my future.
That's the thing. No, that's what I thought, you know, at the time. But they, as much as the UFC was expanding, like they didn't have a monthly show in Europe.
When was this, John? What was the year that this happened in?
2014.
Right.
So I think I may have had 5 shows in 20. Was it 3 or 5? Like not a lot. And like we're not talking kind of Joe Rogan money here either. So all I ever wanted to do was supplement the income that I had as an electrician, being a broadcaster. Quite simply, that's all I wanted. I just wanted a different lifestyle for myself. And that would have sufficed. But we weren't quite there yet. Like Dan and I started our Inside the Octagon show and an analysis show, which is still going, which I'm very proud of. But again, that was like once a month as well. So it now became a business, which was a different thing for me. I'd never worked for myself. I'm now an independent contractor. So yeah, it was difficult to try and make it work. So I was having to do dual roles. And the biggest downer for me, which was after my very first gig, which was the O2 in London. I'd never been to the O2 before. What an enormous place that is when you've never been before. Yeah. And I know that I'm not the man in the middle, but I'm very close. And for me, it was my Champions League final. Like I needed to put on a good show. I didn't really know what I was getting involved in, but I remember all sorts of weird things happening. And Blake, I'm sure you'll be able to talk about these sorts of things as well. But I remember like driving up to the O2 and then just thinking about all these celebrities and why they always wore like glasses. And I think it's because it's like blinkers. Because as we were going to the O2, I just saw thousands of UFC fans going towards the building. And I'm like, oh my God, I'm sort of part of this. And they're going to hear what I've got to say. And I know that I'm a very small part of it, but unfortunately, the framing that I took on at the time made me feel like it was all about me. And I was like, Jesus, I just wanted to sort of curl up and, you know, have some sort of layer of protection. And then when we got into the actual arena itself, I looked up and I felt like I was sort of corkscrewing into the floor as I just saw this enormous space. But fortunately, when the cameras started rolling and the microphones were live, there's no time to think about those sorts of things. And it was a wonderful experience. But I was so high after that. It's being at a UFC event is such a celebratory moment. There are no boos. It's just like cheering, big oohs and ahs, and then massive celebrations. And you're obviously trying to lend some soundtrack to that as well. So you've got to embody it. So you're wired after a show. And then I went to a site on Monday morning with all the plasterers and builders. I rolled up in the van and I didn't sleep on like Saturday night, Sunday. And I just went crashing down. And I'm like, this is bullshit. What is this? And, you know, no one there knew what I'd just done, and all I wanted to do was talk about that, really, not, you know, where these double sockets were going and how many lights we were putting in the ceiling. But I had to sort of straddle that both worlds for a good 2 or 3 years before the money then able to, well, I think I took a little pay cut at first, but it was worth doing so that I could then fully immerse myself in that broadcast life.
So what was the event?
That was, that was Gustafsson Manua.
Oh, I was at that.
I was at that one. Yeah, I was at that as well.
Really?
Yeah. I was
because the Swedes were so loud. They were as loud as all the other, you know, the UK fans that were there, obviously cheering on Jimmy. But I just remember them being so good. It was a great night.
Yeah, absolutely.
I remember it being a good night. I remember there's like a Witherspoons or something in the O2, or like a slug and lettuce, or one of those type of. Yeah. And I think I remember me and my brother and my brother-in-law kind of walking past there after it and just kind of being a bit like, like just a bit despondent because we were like, oh, our guy lost.
Yeah.
And we're like, we're not really up for the having a big drink afterwards as much as we would have been if Manama had won. We'd have been like, get on it, yes. It's amazing how. And this is one thing we wanted to talk to you about was because it's amazing how certain fighters, and I definitely have a kind of national pride bias in me that, you know, it doesn't matter kind of who it is. If they're English or even British, I'm going, go on, Jojo, go on, you know, like Leon, whoever it is. I want them to win. And when they don't, you feel it as a fan. You feel it, and even though he's Irish, particularly on his rise, Conor McGregor for me, he was walking down to that fight against Chad Mendes, looking pretty awful. Like I think he looked very, very gaunt and pale, particularly in that fight. I think it was the first one after Reebok came in, and maybe there was something about the IVs. I don't know. I concocted this whole thing in my head of going like, oh my God, he's not rehydrated properly. Oh, Conor, I hope you're going to be okay, mate. You know, I sat on my sofa, like watching, and you just get nervous for them. And do you have any, or can you allow yourself any sense of, oh, I've rolled with this guy, or I know this person, I've interviewed them, I really like them. How do you then go, oh, I've got to switch that off and just call this fight down the middle and not be excited by what's going on? Because Stu, didn't you have a thing where you were talking about a Frank Bruno Frank Bruno fight?
It was the iconic Carpenter thing when Bruno hit Tyson at 90 seconds and rocked him. The kind of impartial thing went out the window, and Harry Carpenter was literally screamed, "Get in there, Frank!" It was just like, and I just wondered, like, you know, is that something that, you know, if it's one, like, as Blake said, someone you've rolled with or sparred with?
Well, I think the difference there is Harry and Bruno, what a wonderful relationship they had. You're an independent. Harry was broadcasting for an independent network for British ears, largely, right? But I'm working for the UFC, who are an international organization, but based in North America. So I can't champion those individuals. But I wouldn't say, like Blake, you were saying about silencing certain emotions. I think it's important to embrace those emotions. I think when you get to know someone a little bit more closely, that allows you to tell the story. I call myself a storyteller. So I'm also the mouthpiece for these individuals. So the closer I know them, the more I can give you about their character, what might be going on in their lives at that point, so that you can attach to certain elements of them and become a fan or not. So I think it's important to do that. But I'm very much in the business of cheerleading everyone. And I think I've also gotten that because mixed martial arts as a sport has been, you know, kicked and punched by the media for so very long. So for me, they're all heroes. I just happen to know some of them a bit better than others. And of course, you know, when I've grown up in the scene as well, so I've seen some of these guys coming up. Like I was commentating on Conor's fights back in 2010. I was there when him and Joe Duffy fought. And then Joe and I became quite close. And then I've been, I saw Conor recently and we were talking old times, which was very cool for me. I didn't know whether my credit had run out with Mr. McGregor, but on Fight Island, he came over to me and we were still having a conversation despite, you know, 5 or 6 security guys frowning at me with a hand on something that they had in their back pocket. I don't know what it was. But no, it was good to know that he still recognizes my face. But you always have to celebrate. And I have had some moments, I won't lie, seeing Darren Till get knocked out by Masvidal when I knew that Darren's girlfriend and mum, who I'd met off camera because I do a lot of producing work for the UFC, I've been in Darren's house with his girlfriend. They're like head in their hands. Darren's out bad. And I'm screaming and shouting like how wonderful this moment is for Masvidal. But that's my job. And hopefully they understand that. But the power I have to use for that, they definitely heard it. But then, you know, within another couple of months, I might be in their front room again saying, "Hey, Darren, how are you?" So it's a bit weird. And again, Jimmy Manuwa, when he got knocked out by Alexander Rakic, one of the worst moments, one of the best and worst moments from a broadcasting sense. Alexander put together this like incredible head kick. The noise of it connecting and the noise of Jimmy hitting the canvas will never leave me. But then Jimmy just laying out there, I thought the worst for a couple of moments there, and I could see he'd got his daughters there in the audience, and you can't help but be compassionate about those elements. But we're also there as fight fans to celebrate those things as well. So you have to just be a pro, but those things are swirling around. You just then have to pay them off when Jimmy comes back round and sits up. That's something that we all kind of are happy to see and applaud, and you can communicate that to Jimmy's fans. So you have to balance that. And I always try and leave a nugget of they'll have something to work on to be better next time, something to that effect.
John, you touched on something that you said, obviously, like, you know, sitting close to families, they can hear you. We've recently spoke to Paddy Pimblett and Nathaniel Wood about fighting in empty arenas, and can they hear, you know, the commentators? And Nathaniel was like, yeah, he said sometimes, you know, he can hear someone go, "Oh, that was a great shot," and he's like, yes, you know, he feels like he's doing something right. Are you aware the fighters can hear you?
Yes, I am now, because something happened early on with this whole setup. I was very curious to see how it would work. I think, was it Jacksonville? One of the first shows that they had with no fans, because I was actually the first, or our event, UFC London, was, I think, the first victim from the UFC's perspective of the pandemic. We got cancelled on the Monday of fight week, or maybe the Sunday. So I was very keen to see how it would all play out. And I remember someone commenting that DC's words had a positive impact on their strategy mid-fight. And there were some people saying that's not fair, but then, you know, it's like a third or fourth cornerman, right? So there was a moment, and it didn't go down too well with my bosses, but when Darren was fighting Robert Whittaker, Darren goes back to his corner and says to Colin Heron, "My knees, can we swear?"
Yeah.
My knee's fucked. So I then thought that was important for the fans to know that. But I also knew that Whittaker's corner was closer to me than Darren's, and they probably didn't know that. They may have someone on the phone who could tell them that information, but I didn't want to be the guy directly giving them that information in case then they started targeting the leg. So I whispered it because I was aware that DC had said something before, and the fighters could hear this. And we've got cans on as well. So we've got headphones, which also give you a full sense. Like anyone knows, you put headphones in when you're listening to music, you're shouting from the rooftops. So I was maybe overly careful. Some people thought it was smart and they appreciated it. Some people thought it was silly, but it was the right thing for me to do in that moment. Yeah. So that, I guess, is an example of my awareness of the environment.
And so one of the other things, now you've reached this kind of point in your career, you're surrounded by, you know, I use the word heavyweights in a more general term of the industry. And, you know, as a working class lad, do you ever suffer, we've asked all the fighters this as well, do you ever suffer from like imposter syndrome?
Yes, all the time. But I never want to suffer from complacency. And I think you can get settled. And we were talking before we press record earlier about just pivoting and doing different things and keep learning and reskilling and things of that nature. The kids that are coming up, they have got a bucket load of skills that I could only dream of. And it's kind of my job to stay across that and keep leveling up. I've often thought that. I've said to myself, I think I said to you guys earlier about the talent pool being shallow, which therefore means that I might be a B grade broadcaster that managed to get to the top. But then I also look at the UFC production, and I have to recognize that I probably work in the most complicated and challenging sports broadcast on television. I did a 9-hour live stint on Fight Island. 9 hours of live broadcasting, that's unheard of, you know. Boxing, they tag people in for the main event and they just do those fights. So we do it differently at the UFC. There are so many moving parts. You can't have a plan, because you don't know if the fights are going to last 10 seconds or 15 minutes, 25 minutes, and you need to be prepared for everything in between. Football's 90 minutes with a break in the middle. Like, what more can go wrong? So it's a lot more straightforward, and we don't have an off season. So I'm now qualifying things, because I have told myself before, if I was that good, then Sky Sports or BT Sport would be calling me up to do another sport, and I never have done. So I've gotten over that. I was never looking to be a football commentator. I'm not saying I wouldn't like to do it now. Now I have a set of skills, but why am I worried about all of these things when I'm doing the job that I love? The UFC have renewed my contract a couple of times now. I work in different departments for the UFC as well, because I'm here to be of service to mixed martial arts. And that's always been the plan. Service to mixed martial arts, tell the story, keep it simple. And I just have to keep in that mindset.
You say you can't plan for these events, and for the reasons you've pointed out, you don't know whether a fight's going to last the full 15 minutes or a 10-second KO. But I'm assuming you've got stuff in your back pocket that you have to prepare for, because you're like, as you say, when I could just imagine everyone going, there's no way that anyone's got any knockout power in this fight. This is going the distance. And then all of a sudden you're like, oh shit, now we need to improv for the next 10 minutes to keep us on schedule. So how do you, and with that said, do you also have to maybe like prepare or think about stuff that you go, oh, that's really good, I hope we get to do that? And then a fight does go the distance and you have to go, oh, I didn't get to do that thing I really was hoping to do.
100%. Yeah. So I say you can't plan. That was probably the wrong terminology. So we do. And I take over 200 pieces of paper to a broadcast. Wow. Now, we can't use all of that, but they don't always go from 1 to 200. We'll get a short fight, and then all of a sudden we've got to fill. And then we get two long fights, and then we're cutting stuff out and throwing it away. Then we'll get another short fight. We've got to then go back into the trash can, pick up those cards again, because we're recycling them, but in a different position within the broadcast. So it's very complicated. That job is largely done by the producers, however, but I do need to obviously be aware of it. And my memory is not that good to know when I'm given our running order, our format, which is, hundreds of items long, where every individual piece sits. But I do need to kind of know the subject matter of them. And yeah, I come up with phrases and words that I like to put into the broadcast, and particularly my pieces to camera. I love the English language and wordplay. And I sometimes sort of kick myself if I miss that wonderful word that would have just made the difference in that 30-second piece that I had to try and, deliver something informative and maybe in an entertaining way to give people a better picture of what's going on. So there are all kinds of frustrations, and you say some stupid shit when you've got a microphone in front of you for 6 or 7 hours. I challenge anyone to do it. I've come out with some corkers.
I can barely do this without saying something stupid. So yeah, I mean, to be as someone that's done a small amount of live TV, that what you've just described sounds so stressful to me. I'm like, I am used to learning a script, knowing what I'm doing, hopefully getting a couple of takes, or if it's live, you just like, you've got to kind of roll with it, like theater and all that kind of stuff. Yeah. But 9 hours of that, and picking stuff up and dropping it and then picking it up again, that sounds incredible. It sounds like you're overqualified for BT Sport and and all these football broadcasts, to be honest, mate. But we talk as well a lot with the fighters about kind of mental health, and particularly for me, something that I can get quite frustrated with is social media. And we talk about commentating in general, and my head goes to commentators for football who get absolutely pasted. I remember chatting to Danny Murphy once, and he was like, you just have to just deal with it, because I know that every football broadcast and most of them are trending as well all the time, that like either Steve McManaman or Danny Murphy or Danny Mills or Glenn Hoddle or whatever, they all trend. And the majority of when you flick through those trends is people saying quite horrible, negative stuff about that person. It's like, Joe Bloggs, who's on his sofa, who's never kicked a ball professionally, is telling these ex-professionals that they don't know what they're talking about, which is just stupid, really. But what I don't see that so much with MMA. You may correct me on that, but what I feel like I have seen with MMA, and I'm looking at you and I feel like you've got a lot to say about this, but what I feel like I have seen with MMA is a lot of the hardcore fans seem to have very strong opinions on the commentators. And annoyingly, some of the MMA journalists seem to have very strong opinions on the commentators. So I wondered, A, have you had any negativity, or have you spoke to anyone that you've worked with that's also had negativity? And has it affected you? And have you had to find a way of kind of dealing with it?
It's the most challenging part of my job.
Really?
Yeah.
Simple.
Yeah, it really is. In many ways, social media, I mean, not the feedback loop, but social media, and many things play into that. I'll give you one straight out the gates. I wish your mum would have swallowed. I mean, that's great.
What?
It was, I mean, you know.
What had you done wrong that night?
I mean, I had to laugh in the end. So, I mean, sadly, I could probably do a podcast on this one topic, but I think that's more about my personality type, and I surrender to that. I don't have the thickest skin in the world, but my very first experience was going from Cage Warriors to actually my first ever involvement with UFC was with BT Sport. They'd invited me down to cover the UFC event. It was the first time in their new deal that they were going to be hosting UFC Manchester, and I didn't really know what I was getting myself in for. So I was invited down there to talk about the rules of the octagon. And then at the end of the night, I was going to give my opinion. I was going to be in the studio with Caroline Pierce, who was new to mixed martial arts, and a younger broadcaster. I don't mean that disrespectfully, but when you're on a live broadcast for so many hours, like a news broadcaster, you've really got to be hot. And she did a good job on the night, by the way. It's just very, very challenging. Anyway, I get there and all of a sudden, I'm not just doing these two little bits. They came to me during the walkouts, between rounds, after the opponents had their arm raised. And I'm like, and I knew that the fans wouldn't like it. I just knew it, because you're completely ripping up what the UFC product looked like and putting just an English voice on it. And again, it was just Caroline and I, you know. And the one thing I learned at that point was MMA and UFC are different. So I've been in the MMA space for many years now, and I've been working in all sorts of different regards, but no one really knew who I was with the UFC fans, because they're not watching the grassroots stuff. So they're like, who the hell is that guy? I don't respect your opinion. How dare you speak? And they let me know about it. And Caroline as well. And I just was not prepared for that. I opened up my phone, I came off air, and they said, that was great, guys. Oh, that's brilliant. Really enjoyed it. I'm like, okay, cool. Maybe I'll be in here. I might have a future doing some stuff with BT Sport. And I'd traveled down from actually being at the event the day before in Manchester with the UFC team to be there. So I was making all of this effort to put myself in that position. Turned on my phone, and I was used to sort of 40 notifications when it was my birthday, mostly my friends with multiple notes saying, you're getting old now, you fuck. And now it's like obscene stuff. Like I was physically shaking, going, what have I done? I've blown it. What did I say that was so wrong? Oh my God. And I've never been someone who wanted to offend. Going back to my childhood, where I was maybe a bit boastful or saying the wrong things, and it didn't work for me. So this was tapping into some of that. And my wife, who was head of marketing at MTV at the time, she's used to the social media space. And I just said, look, you're going to have to take my Twitter account and my passwords. Oh my God, don't go through my DMs, and just go through the notifications and clear them, because I can't do this. I'm not prepared for it. And it was a very vicious learning curve for me. But one thing that came out of it, there were a few guys out the UK MMA scene that stayed up all night, didn't go to bed, like fighting my case for me whilst I was a quivering mess back home in a dark corner of my house. And that meant so much to me. A guy called Jivan who did that. I just can't believe that I'd never met the guy before, and he would do that for me. So I learned very quickly that I was going to have to get around this, and I called the UFC because I thought I'd messed up with them. I hadn't been offered anything with them at this point, but we were talking. This was before I'd screen tested for them. And they actually said, we thought you did a good job. It was just the formats. Then the fans didn't like the format, and you're kind of the victim of it. So we got past that, but we still get it. You know, I say some stuff sometimes that people don't like. I feel like I'm not the new guy anymore, but I'm also not the guy that's rammed down their throats all the time. So when you do hear me alongside someone else, it's more of a fresh listen. So I get away with it a bit more. They're comfortable enough not to shoot me down, but they also don't want to hear me that much that I'm there every week. So yeah, it's just a balance. And you have to realize that a faceless person on Twitter is not your yardstick for your personal performance. Your producer who signs your check is the guy you've got to impress, and probably more than that, Dana White, who scares the living daylights out of me. So, you know, I have to look in that direction because they understand the broadcast. Like you guys who understand broadcasting probably didn't know some of the smaller details that I'd explained. So you now might have a sympathetic ear next time you hear us, any of us, like John, Brendan, or myself, if you hear us stutter. Sometimes you might hear periods where we're going quiet, but that's because we're inviting in an international audience. They've told us to lay out at that point so we don't tread across the breaks. And happened to Paul Felder, actually, when he was interviewing Tai Tuivasa the other day.
Yes,
Tai had said that his that a friend of his had passed away, and I knew what was going on because I'm privy to that information. In his ear, whilst Tai would have been recounting that story, Paul would have someone saying, "Okay, Paul, we've got internationals coming back in and counting down in 5, 4," and he's nodding, probably nodding to the count, but also to Tai. It comes in at the wrong time. He's got to welcome back an audience because they've just been absent for 3 minutes. So much to deal with. And then Paul's not as used to that count as what I am. I lead the dance, so I throw to them. They get the lead from me, not the producers so much. So it's very difficult, but you just got to get over it. We have a job to do. I've spoken to a performance coach before, not just about that, but to just be better at what I do. And it was an area that came up, and we did have to look at that and why it would have these effects. And essentially, you just have to reframe it and just, you know, look at things differently, find your feedback in the more appropriate places, and press on.
You spoke about working with Paul, and you work with some fantastic kind of, particularly like ex-fighters and correct me if I'm wrong, your role as the play-by-play commentator is to kind of speak about what's going on in front of you and then throw over to the color commentators, so the Paul Felders, the DCs, the Joe Rogans, etc., to kind of give us, the audience, more detail about that. Is that correct?
I'm the what and they're the why. Yeah.
Yes.
But I have to say, and the UFC, I think they don't like me talking about this because I have a sort of different view of how it's historically been done, and it's a result of the sport being so young. So, for example, in football, like Ian Dark, if it's a throw-in, a penalty, a short pass, a long ball, you know, chest to control, takes it on the knee, dummies, step over to pass, it's all him. Ball goes out of play, the analyst comes in. But in mixed martial arts, we really have taken on, or certainly with the UFC, Mike Goldberg and Joe Rogan had this kind of dynamic where Mike wasn't very technical, a fantastic broadcaster, but he didn't really know an omoplata from a kimura. So for me, though, as someone who trains in the sport, but I still don't know everything. I make that very clear, and I get it wrong, but I like to try because that's the only way you get better. There's no difference for me whether it's a jab or an advanced to side control. or an underhook, overhook to an outside trip. It's still a what. Whereas I think the UFC fans and the broadcast has been set up where Joe just takes all of that and Mike does more of the promotional work and the atmospheric stuff. But that's not really how sports commentating has been done across all the other sports. I'm not necessarily saying that's the right way to do it. We can always do it differently. So I do probably tread more in line with that, where if I was to work with Joe Rogan, I think you'd be quite surprised at the amount that I would want to speak, because I'm like, Joe, don't do that bit. Like, I can do that bit. I want you to now say why it did or didn't work, or why that was the decision-making process. So I want to walk you deeper as a fan and educate to that next level. So that's what I try and do. But that's why it's also important for me to carry on training so that I develop that vocabulary.
Yeah. You mentioned that the sport's still young. I mean, as we start to sort of wrap this up now, just lastly, I'd like to ask you, what would you say has been the most interesting and positive changes you've seen from the evolution of the last sort of 10 years of MMA, you know, or UFC?
Yeah, I think the unified rules was big. That was maybe the turn of the century that they brought that in. So that now means that people, I mean, it's not entirely true, but because there are different iterations still, but you'd be surprised through the amateur to, well, they did have a semi-pro thing back in the day as well, how many different rule sets there were, and how confusing that is for a fighter. We've seen it recently with people not understanding the Demetrius Johnson situation. Well, ONE FC have like more closer to the old Pride rules, where you can kick when a fighter is downed. So with that, there's still a lack of education and understanding around those things, but that was a very big part. The drug testing has made the playing field very, very different as well. So that's something that's been key. And then I'd like to say, like, this is a bit more geeky, but the establishment of federations internationally, so that we have an amateur program that's in development to help these fighters have a more structured way of becoming a professional fighter and having like an Olympic setup, so that they can feel like they're being competitive, not just on the undercard of pro fighters and always thinking like that's what they've got to do next, but competing against the very best from around the world, against, you know, boys and girls, men and women who are at their level at the same time. So they're the three that come to mind immediately.
And what about the sort of the evolution of the UFC superstar as well? I mean, going back sort of maybe 10 years and further, there was people that MMA fans loved, but now we're seeing with McGregor, with Ronda, and now with Stylebender and so on, we're seeing superstars coming through, and obviously that's opening. I mean, just personally, the amount of people I know that now watch UFC because of Conor McGregor. Like, I mean, how have you sort of seen that side of things in regards to sort of fans and the growth of the sport?
Yeah, well, the UFC did a very good job of aligning themselves with the digital age. So if you were an MMA fan back in the day, like in the 90s and in the early noughties, you'd have to be pretty au fait with technology to do, I've forgotten what they're called now, but stream content, essentially, torrents and things of that nature. Be invited into these groups so that you could see what that Pride event looked like, or that UFC fight, because it wasn't like hitting our screens and we didn't want to wait for the VHS. So they embraced that. They've embraced social media to an extent that we've grown with that. And these were some conversations I was having recently as well around media training athletes. The UFC have never done that. They've allowed the athletes, the fighters, to have their own voice. And that's been good and bad. You know, you've got guys like Mike Perry right now, where you think, God, like, he sounds like he's going off the rails. But then you've also got guys like Darren Till, who, you know, if he had Arsenal Football Club around him and he was an Arsenal player, there's no way he would be able to say what he does, but then we wouldn't know what he was like.
Yeah. And
we'd be missing out on that comedy and the true raw nature of his personality. So the UFC have done a very good job of thinking ahead with all of those things, and they've grown with that social media age and opened up and allowed people in with technology and given the access. But it's also indicative of how small the sport is, that you guys could find your nearest gym, which I recognize some of the accents. Let's say you're in South London and Nathaniel Wood trains around those. You could get on the mat with Nathaniel Wood. There's no way as an Arsenal fan, I could just go kick a ball about with Hector Bellerin. So we still have that proximity where the fans are reachable, touchable, and we can slide into their DMs and we might, be able to connect with them as well. So I think it's a bit of a state of the times, as well as some obviously very clever plays by the UFC as well.
John, it's been an absolute. Oh, sorry, Blake.
Well, no, I wanted to ask you just one last question, John, and it's I think the most important question you're going to be asked today is, during these really long broadcasts, when the hell do you go to the toilet, mate? Because as someone, before I go on stage, I wee about 10 times in 10 minutes. I'm a nervous wreck. How on earth? Where? Like, have you got a bottle under there? Like, what's going on?
I have a hose attachment. Yeah, no, I've become kind of notorious to the MMA media now, and it's quite funny in Fight Island, because of course we're in this bubble, and I chose the toilets that went through the media tent. I have the bladder of a mouse, so I'll probably go 5 times during a broadcast, but I sprint. I literally sprint to the toilet, and one day I'm going to stack it, because as you guys all know, like there's cables everywhere.
Yeah,
it's dark, and I don't see well in the dark, so I'm going to go over. And I remember being in Brazil. I got into the toilet, and I went to cut a right angle, and I just slid through. If I hadn't have found the wall, I would have gone arse over tits. But I bounced like a pinball off of each side of the cubicle, and then was able to do a wee. And another time, I actually ended up having to go during the main event at UFC Dublin. It was Paddy Houlihan that was fighting, and Dan and I were younger broadcasters then. But I get to the toilet, and I was bursting to go, and I knew that we had to do like a piece to camera after the fights. But my trousers were fully undone. The zipper was down. Like I was bulging, like I was at least 3 or 4 months pregnant. So I'm in the toilet, and I just couldn't stop pissing. I rearranged the place, did a little tidying up, some cleaning, but I had my earpiece in, and I could hear Dan doing all the commentary, and it sounded like a horse racing broadcast. Do you know what I mean? It was so funny. And I got back to the desk, and I was so relieved that I could finally do my tailored trousers back up and stand in front of that camera when the broadcast was done a lot more comfortably, and not be a meme the next day with a growing wet patch down my grey suit.
Yeah. Oh, mate.
Well, thank you so much for your time today, John. But before you go, what was the address again for the charity?
At keepingthelightson.net.
Wonderful. John, honestly, thank you so much for your time today. It's been a real privilege.
No, privilege and pleasure is all mine. Thank you very much, guys. Good luck. It's great to see guys like yourselves, the podcasting space and the acting space, coming over and enjoying mixed martial arts as much as we do. You guys will bring new eyes and ears to our sport. So it's great to see how we're all developing and enjoying this wonderful art that we so much enjoy watching. And we got early fights.
Yeah,
I know, that's so exciting. This will be going out well after today. But yeah, we had early fights. Wasn't that good? Back when we had those early fights.
We've been looking so chipper if we were doing this after, because we'd have stayed up till the small hours. So good. I'm looking forward to this.
It's been such a pleasure chatting with you, mate. Thanks so much.
Thanks, mate.
Thank you so much. Cheers.